I think without further ado, we can invite Brittany to come on the live stream. Hello, Brittany.
Hi.
We're very excited to have you and learn about you and your team and your organization and all the amazing work you're doing to combat climate change. So, without further ado, Brittany Bennett from the Sunrise Movement.
Thank you. I actually know Derek from a project that I did wearing another hat. So when I was at an organization called Data for Progress, we did some research into the jobs created by green policy. And then we worked with Derek to build from DataMade to build this really wonderful data visualization site. So I'll be sure to make sure Derek drops that in the chat. But I'm really excited to talk to all of you tonight about the work that I do at the Sunrise Movement and the work that I do to build the people power to pass a Green New Deal and create millions of good union jobs. And so, as Derek said, my name is Brittany Bennett. The lack of capitalizations is on purpose, and I am the very first data director at the Sunrise Movement. And this would be the point in my presentation where I would go, who here has heard of the Sunrise Movement? And I would make you put little stars in the chat, but I actually cannot see the chat. And I believe that we were on a delay. So instead, I am going to assume that some of you have heard of the Sunrise Movement. Some of you may be members. Some of you may have no idea what the Sunrise Movement is. So I'm going to briefly explain. The Sunrise Movement is a youth movement to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. Good union jobs, I might add at that. We're building an army of young people to make climate change an urgent priority across America and the corrupting influence of fossil fuel executives on our politics and elect leaders who stand up for the health and well-being of all people. And so this is a map. This is one of my favorite maps that I get to work with at work. It shows all of our hubs all across the country, including in Alaska and Hawaii, which I really love. Over 330 active hubs in all. I think at our peak, we've had over 400 hubs. We've done a lot of data maintenance to really understand who's an active chapter and who's not an active chapter, which is a fun data project I can talk about if someone wants to. And I also know that on this map, you can see that there is a hub in Chicago. And so I don't know if any of you are in the Chicago hub or know someone that's in the Chicago hub. My coworkers talk a lot about the amazing organizing work that's going on here, and would love for someone at the end of this presentation to maybe speak to some of the climate organizing happening in your city. I want to next talk a little bit about our theory of change because it's important for understanding the kind of data work that I do. So our theory of change is predicated on the belief that people power plus political power and the alignment of both of those things can produce the conditions necessary for passing bold climate policy. And so when we talk about people power, we talk about developing an active base of public support through organizing, conversations, phone banking, text banking, you name it. Political power is probably something we're all familiar with. We want to catalyze a critical mass of public officials who will fight for a Green New Deal and who will share our vision. And the alignment of these two things is that we want to build an extensive network of movements and groups united by the shared vision of a government that fights for dignity and justice for all. So this equation is pretty important in my work because part of what I do was trying to prove that this is true and works. You may know us for our protest work. So Sunrise really came to light in 2018 when 250 young people descended upon our nation's capital and took over Nancy Pelosi's office to demand a Green New Deal. And this woman you see jumping up and down, screaming, used to be our chief operating officer, if that gives you any insight into the kind of culture of my workplace. And what's not pictured here is that we were actually joined by AOC, who was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was just a freshman at the time, and like really catapulted this idea of the Green New Deal into the public space. More recently, you might have noticed that last summer, me, all my coworkers, and about 500 young people descended to the White House and actually barricaded all 10 entrances to demand that President Joe Biden act on his elected mandate of climate justice and pass an American jobs plan that includes like ambitious solutions and a civilian climate corps. This was actually the first kind of real protest I really went to, and it was sometimes the first time I ever met most of my coworkers since I joined in January of 2020. It was a really wonderful time to get some firsthand experience with our protest work. We also do electoral work. So in 2020, we contacted over 6.5 million voters in the primaries and general election, helping to create some of the largest youth turnout in history. We did this through peer-to-peer text banking, a massive dialer program, and a volunteer postcard program. All of that has huge underlining data engineering and data analysis work involved, and I'm happy to talk about electoral work and data work and the overlap of those two things. And then finally, we do trainings to level up our base and teach them the tangible skills they need to organize in their communities. I was actually here at this training. This is when we were training people to take over the White House, but we also do more C3 trainings around leadership development, organizing, how to do relational organizing, and how to really show up strong in your community. And so all of this is to say that I'm really proud to work for Sunrise. I really love our work. I think we're doing what it takes in order to pass bold climate policy. But you may be wondering, where does data fit into all of this? Why does Sunrise need a data director? And so I was hired in January of 2020 as Sunrise's very first data director. The organization started 4 or 5 years ago, really didn't get going until like 2018 at the Pelosi sit-in. And then in 2020, they were like, we should maybe hire a data director. And so I came on the scene, and in the past 2 years, I have built Sunrise's data team, expanded our team to 4 full-time staff, built a lot of our engineering workflows, built a lot of our reporting, built the culture of data at our organization. And so when I talk about what I do at work, when I talk about it, whether it's to a coworker or to a funder or to y'all, I like to say that I leverage data analytics to drive effective organizing. Or in a more pithy way, I answer the question, are we winning? And I do that in a couple of ways. So, well, I have a couple of questions on my mind that I think about that really guide most of my work. So 1, how is our movement growing? 2, how engaged or active is our movement? 3, how strong is our movement? And then what effect is our people power having on public opinion and the policy fight? So if we go back to that equation that I saw earlier, I am doing kind of 2 things in my role. 1, I'm doing analytics on our people power itself. How many members do we have? How engaged are they? How many hubs do we have? How engaged are they? How active are they? How strong are they? What are the demographics of our base? And then I'm also doing some work to look at, as our people power increases, is our political power also increasing? What is the relationship between those 2 things? And how is that creating the conditions for us to pass a Green New Deal? And so I want to step back and say that I do not do this work alone. I am blessed to have an incredible team of analysts and engineers who run Sunrise's data program, and they truly are the backbone of this work. So Vianney Martinez on the left, who is our deputy data director, Elliot Richardson, who manages all of our field and electoral data, Agaros, who does all of our organizing data work, and then Jasmine, who has a full-time role supporting our hubs and chapters to make sure that they have the data and tech and resources they need to do effective organizing. And while I cannot see the chat, I would love if y'all could put some love in the chat for my team. So what does a data team do at Sunrise Movement, where our mission is to pass a Green New Deal? I think if you work in data, you will find a lot of this really familiar, because what I do is not so different than a VP of data or head of data at a tech company. So first, we collaborate with organizers to set measurable yet ambitious goals for programs. So this looks like meeting with organizers who are leading programs such as protest or trainings, online programs, phone banks, text banks, and to understand what are you trying to accomplish and how will you know it when you see it. And then what my team does is that we design the data collection systems in order to track that progress, track that goal, track that metric. So this could look like designing systems in our CRM, Van or Every Action, which if you work in progressive politics, you're probably intimately familiar with EA. And if not, it's just a CRM. CRM meaning like database where you store your contacts. Airtable, and then I am very lucky that I am a member of the Movement Cooperative and get access to a cloud-based data warehouse. And so Redshift is another tool that I have at my disposal for creating data engineering systems in order to track how our organizing is working. We then transform the data in our analytics infrastructure. So to be very specific, we use a tool called DBT, Data Build Tool. It's created by DBT Labs. I primarily identify as an analytics engineer, and DBT is the tool to use if you are an analytics engineer. And so a lot of what I do is doing analytics with DBT in order to take raw data from our sources, like our texting tools, our dialers, our events tool, our CRM, and transform it into something that is usable to the human eye. And then finally, we don't like to keep the data. We're not hoarders of the data. We're not dragons sitting on our data layer, keeping the data for ourselves. As data director of Sunrise, I think a lot about how we can democratize data, not only in our staff, but across our base. And so thinking through dashboards, reports, and systems that make data transparent, but also make data explorable. So if you were looking at a dashboard and say you saw that our membership numbers decreased from one month to the next month, designing systems that let the user explore that question on their own and wrestle with the data themselves. If any of you work in data and are obsessed about the idea of a metrics layer as much as I am, please reach out to me after this talk. Oh, and then finally, again, develop and maintain core metrics. So like, I think a lot about what are the top level metrics that I need to be focused on in order to effectively work with my leadership team to understand if we're on track to win or not. And so defining metrics, tracking metrics, communicating metrics, visualizing metrics is like a very large part of my job. And then the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to go over a couple of metrics that I keep track of at my work. And then if anyone in the chat has like follow-up questions, I'd be more than happy to elaborate on any of this. So one of the main things that I track and think about is how our people power is growing, how our movement is growing. And a lot of this looks like tracking membership over time. And maybe you've had to do this at work. Maybe you've never thought about this at all. But the question here is, who is a member of Sunrise? So Sunrise is a mass protest movement, and say like anyone could just decide one day, hey, I'm a member of Sunrise, and self-identify as a member of Sunrise. And it is my job as an analytics engineer, as the data director of Sunrise, to go, yes, and we do need some way of quantifying our membership and measuring this. And so what's in our data that could indicate that someone is a member of Sunrise versus not a member? And what I've done is aggregated and synthesized sort of all of our event data, all of the data from our CRM, data from our advocacy tools, our text-making tools, and sought to understand basically if someone has taken 3 high bar actions with us, they have become and they have taken any kind of action with us within a 6-month window, then they are an active member at Sunrise. And writing that code in SQL and doing the analytics work on that is one of my favorite parts of my job. So thinking about membership, thinking about how to define membership, thinking about how to track active membership over time, and then also thinking about the demographics of our membership base. It is not enough to grow membership, but have a membership that is majority white, correct? We are trying to build a multiracial cross-class movement, and through our organizing, we collect self-reported demographics such as race, gender, and self-reported class, which I have my own separate rant for how to do that responsibly and what it tells you. But we use those demographics to assess how our movement is growing in terms of diversity. Another metric that I care deeply about is how engaged or active is our movement. And I will share this somehow after this talk, but I have a website, and on that website is a blog. And on that blog is an article I wrote replicating an analysis called the orbit model, but for Sunrise movement. And in that analysis, I build out Sunrise's engagement model. And so our engagement model, I think, is fairly interesting. Members, or people in general, can take action with us. They can sign up for an email, they can click on an ad, they can do a text bank, do a phone bank, RSVP to an event, attend an event, host an event, come to a training, et cetera, et cetera. I have built an engagement point system for that, where every action corresponds to a certain number of points, with high risk actions, such as like protest work, gaining a full 5 points, and then more low bar digital actions like signing up for our email list and responding to an ad, weighing about 1 point. And then of course you tally that up, sum it over time, and you get a graph like this. What's interesting about the analysis I did with the orbit model is that it takes it one step further and adds a decay function on top of the engagement model, which is to say that actions taken in the past are worth less points. Again, building this out in SQL was really fun, really engaging, part of my work as an analytics engineer. And through this, we're able to track how our base is engaged. And we use this to drive decision-making around what actions, what asks, what programs really resonate with our base and drive them. We have found that our base tends to be most engaged around national crises of climate emergency, such as the Texas freeze or the California wildfires. We have also seen our base most engaged when we lean into talking about abolition and the fight for Black Lives Matter. And so we're able to take these insights and then make decisions about what kind of programs, strategies, and tactics we want to run again in the future. Third, I think about how strong is our movement. And this is such a fascinating question to me, because I think this is where, as an analytics engineer, you get to really shine, because this doesn't have such a concrete definition, right? What does it mean to be powerful? What does it mean to have people power? What does it mean to have political power? How do you track that? And so this graph you're seeing right here, I apologize if you can't see clearly, referencing the orbit model that I referenced earlier, they have a metric called gravity, which is the combination of engagement, which I just talked about, and reach. Reach being a person's relationship to one another or to their community. And then you combine these two metrics together per person, per week, per month, over time, and you get a graph that looks like this. And I talk a little bit more about the pluses and minuses of using a metric like this, but I use this graph to show one of the ways that I'm thinking about how do we capture our movement's power, and how do we know if we're on the right track. Finally, the last big bucket of work I really think about is what effect is our people power having on public opinion in the policy fight? And this is honestly where I rely on my colleagues, especially my friends at Data for Progress. And they have done quite a bit of polling to show that the Green New Deal is popular. And honestly, I haven't done it yet. One of the things that's on my plate to do is to compile their public issue polling on the Green New Deal and show how that's changed over time and map it in parallel with our work to build people power for a Green New Deal. So issue polling, polling in general is very important to my work. I do not do issue polling myself, but I rely on other people who are experts in that to do issue polling, and then I get to read the results. I'm actually not going to do this section. I was going to talk about this article that I wrote, which is about how I've invested in the junior talent on my team and built a really powerful data team. If you're interested in management and investing in others, in technical management, I will make sure Derek shares this article with y'all. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about how to be a good manager and how to be a good data director, and would be happy to share them with you. But I believe that I killed that. I ended right on time. I want to thank all of you for listening. You can find me at the BM Bennett on Twitter, or you can email me at my personal email address, thebrittnybennett@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to take some questions.
All right, you nailed it on the dot, 7:35, amazing. We have lots of questions for you. So a mix of questions from folks in the chat. And I have a few questions. I'm sure Claire has some too. And for those of you watching on the live chat, please do type your questions right into the chat, and we will add them and get to them in the order in which they were asked. So I'll go ahead and start with the first question that we got in the chat, which is from Steve. So he says, I love the emphasis on unions, which is a first and necessary step. How will you focus on worker, producer, consumer cooperatives to complete the transformation in a new way of doing business?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a necessarily great answer for that, but I will say that we believe that if we are going to pass a Green New Deal, the jobs created from that investment need to be good union jobs. So like if we're going to pass a bolt infrastructure bill and reinvest in our highways and our bridges and infrastructure, the jobs created then that need to be union jobs. And if no one, I think, Derek, from some of the work that you and I have done around green jobs, we have found that if no one is really advocating for that, the status quo is that these jobs will not be union or not be diverse. And so Sunrise is in the position of advocating for good union job creation.
You want to do the next one, Claire?
Okay. Another audience question. The Sunrise Movement map shows a lack of chapters in key areas such as the Southeast and Gulf Coasts and the states west of the Mississippi. What is being done to mobilize in these areas?
Yeah, that is real and fair and something that we are very well aware of. I'll say, I think 2 or 3 things here. We're very aware that we don't have, especially I will speak to the lack of chapters, hubs we have in the South. We know that's like a dire problem, and we have invested in organizers. Like I have a coworker that just does organizing in North Carolina. And I also have a coworker that was building a constituency network for rural hubs to provide support for hubs in rural and red areas. The second thing I want to say is just that Sunrise has been engaged in a process called front loading for the last year, which means we haven't been actively organizing in the last year. And instead, we spent the past year reflecting inwards, building a 5-year strategic plan, investing in our DNA, and like rethinking of a new strategy. And so I think that map shows the results of what happens when you kind of let your organizing stall for a year. And it's something that as we launch Sunrise 2.0 in a couple of weeks and start to kick back up our organizing, I think a lot of our organizers and staff would love to do some more targeted recruitment in those states that you just listed.
Cool. Man, we should have had you come in 2 weeks. I'm sure we'll get a chance to share when that gets announced, when the new strategy is rolled out. So we'll make sure to share that with folks when it gets announced. Next question. Can you talk a little bit about some of the organizations that you've maybe looked to for inspiration and how they've leveraged their data in their organization?
That's such a great question. I have so many people who are inspirations to me. Ari Trujillo Weber, who does data leadership over at the Sierra Club, is a personal friend and someone that has mentored me in some ways. And I really admire what they've done to create OpenField, which is an open source progressive tool for canvassing, which if you know anything about our space, it's rare to have new tools come onto the market, be open source, and it's just really great. I also have a really good friendship with James, who's a data director at People's Action, and I've really admired People's Action's work around deep canvassing and find it really inspirational and like just want, to take more lessons learned from them. And then of course, I think Indivisible is the organization that is closest in structure and sort of mission to us in some ways. And their data director has honestly been a mentor to me and been a friend and like has really helped me in my role. So I take a lot of strength from our community and really appreciate that I get to be in community with such wonderful data directors.
Awesome.
Okay. Question. What is the status of your efforts to get a Green New Deal passed?
Yeah, so I am not the best person to answer the like nitty gritty details of our campaign fight. I think where we left off is honestly, we are in a minutia moment of a little bit of defeat in passing bold infrastructure policy and passing climate policy. And as I hinted, we are shifting towards launching Sunrise 2.0 with a new strategy, a new set of organizing programs. And as part of that shift, I believe that we are turning our attention towards more local efforts. And I think there is a lot of fights to be won at the state and local level. And I feel really excited to be working on those fights.
Awesome. Next question. So this is for me. In my observations in the political space, like data is oftentimes like, as you kind of meant, you like alluded to, like being a dragon, like hoarding the data. Like that is what I've observed is the way that a lot of political organizations sort of behave with data. It's this sort of coveted resource and they're going to hold on to it and not share it with anybody. And so I'm kind of curious how Sunrise's actions in this space, how that's been received, or if there's been any kind of maybe broader change you've seen of more opening up of data in the sort of activist political space.
To be like pretty specific, one thing that I do at work is at the start of every quarter, I write a public memo to our base, which is public to the internet, with tables that show our race, gender, and class makeup of our base, our staff, and our like management staff. And I write a little like message to our base about, where we're at and how we're either making progress or not making progress. And something that I'm starting to do but want to lean into more is talking to my peers and fellow data directors to encourage them that if they are collecting self-reported demographic information to periodically make that public. I believe that if you're, you can't, it's a give and a take when you like run a data program. And if you're taking data from someone, I think there is some ethical obligation to give something back. And oftentimes it's in like our services, right? But I think in the case of demographic information, I feel pretty committed to our public demographic reports and like would want to push for other organizations to do something similar.
Great.
Audience question. What are some of the particular ways you've seen analytics improve organizing strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it can be from something. So I guess I'll back up and say that oftentimes it's low hanging fruit. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not building machine learning algorithms. We're not optimizing performance. And like sometimes it's as simple as like the hardest part of my job can be building data engineering systems so organizers know how many people have signed up to their phone bank, how many calls have they made, how many texts have they sent, what percentage of people that have applied to this program are BIPOC or working class or trans. Those simple questions, those basic sums, counts, and averages are the building blocks of my work, and can really go a long way in providing insight for organizers. So like what I said, like showing our membership numbers overall is really helpful. But I think on the day-to-day level, it's a lot of how many people have signed up for this program. What are the survey results like for feedback for this program? Are they mainly positive? What are they pointing out? Are we going to meet our goal for like the dials we want to make this quarter? It's metrics and goals and data like that get us 90% of the way there. And then some of the more heady analytic stuff I do is nice, but sums and counts are really the most sophisticated math that I do.
Interesting.
Cool. Yeah, I think that echoes what I've heard a lot of folks who do analytics broadly say, right? Is that, yeah, it's just about getting the data organized and then not so much like, yeah, crazy machine learning algorithms, which is maybe how some people romanticize it. So you had mentioned, actually, yeah, in your response to a previous question around giving back when you're taking, you're sort of, there's a give and take with the data. Can you talk a little bit more about like how you balance transparency in your data with the privacy concerns? Because ultimately your data is mostly, I assume, about people. So how do you sort of engage or negotiate that sort of that trade-off?
Yeah, I have pretty strong feelings around like privacy with our data. And we have a privacy policy that, I use as part of my job. Like I have to refer to our privacy policy. We have pretty strict, like we don't sell our data list or email list to other people. And I feel pretty strongly that that's the right decision to make. Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because like the demographic work I do, it's all aggregated and anonymized, like we're not revealing any PII or like personal information with that. And it's funny because like I also run our organization's digital and cybersecurity. So I'm like the one constantly going into Google Docs and switching the share permissions or like asking people to use their VPN or use 2FA. So privacy is very much a concern for me, but I think like keeping the personal information private and the data engineering and systems that go into that is one thing. And then I think sharing the lessons learned from our data and analytics is another. And I feel very strongly about sharing our insights and what we're working on as a way of I don't want other organizations to reinvent the wheel. And in some respects, we're all kind of working on the same problem. And again, community is very important to me. And I rather share what I have than keep it to myself.
Great.
Is it my turn?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Let's try. Okay. How critical has data been in the transition to Sunrise 2.0?
That's a really great question. I've done some work with our front-loading team to do a retroactive analysis of sort of what's worked and what hasn't worked with our first iteration of Sunrise. So pulling lessons learned from what builds a multiracial cross-class movement. That's sort of the biggest question on everyone's mind. And what the data shows us is like partnering with Black-led, Indigenous-led organizations is key there. Having trust with Black-led and Indigenous-led organizations is really key. And not siloing climate away from the fight for abolition and Black lives, and really showing that those two fights are pretty interconnected has been what's worked for us. So I got to advise our front-loading team on some of those insights that I had seen from our analytics.
Great. Let's see here. Next question. Yeah, so this is from me. So given the amount of pessimism in public conversation regarding climate change, how do you, or, I'm just curious how you approach staying positive about the work that you do, given the doom and gloom that is oftentimes like associated with whenever climate change is brought up, because you live it every day.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a super eloquent answer to that other than to say I work in an organization where organizing is key, and I am not an organizer, but I have learned a lot about organizing from my coworkers. And the crux of organizing is relationship building. It's about connecting with another person, building relationships, forging community, being there for one another. And when I think about the climate crisis, what gives me hope and what keeps me going is our relationships to one another and our community, which is why I'm so invested in building mutual aid networks and being present in my community here in Pittsburgh. I really believe that it will be our love and empathy for one another that saves us. And I see that every day with my coworkers. I see it in the fight. I see it in the art that gets made. I see it like in so many people resisting and focusing on that. I mean, yeah, I feel like as long as we have our community, we're gonna be okay.
That's like a great pitch for joining the sunrise movement.
It wasn't meant to be. It's just like as the climate crisis approaches and we have, economic crises and like political crises, like it'll be like people relying on each other and being there for one another. And like that's it. Like, and that's organizing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it helps a lot that it's true, right? That like it's a pitch and that it is true. Cool. You want to get the next one, Claire?
Sure. Okay. There we go. Do the volunteers / members see the importance of the data reporting, and or how is that data shared back with them?
So for the reports that are public, we share in our Slack and in our weekly newsletter. I mean, like it's kind of like, I think if you ask any data professional, they will say, no one really understands my work. No one gets the data like I do. So like, I'm not really thinking about whether, I think our hubs appreciate that we make some data transparent and have have a culture of transparency of the organization. And if they find it useful, that's great. If they couldn't care less, that's part of being a data professional. Sometimes your dashboards don't get looked at.
So I think we have a few minutes left. So I know you had sort of cut through a few of the slides that you had included about the blog post you wrote about developing your team. So maybe if you could spend just like a couple minutes, and we will share a link to that with everybody, as I think it's really useful for our community. But maybe could you give some highlights about some of the, specifically for folks who are either in or maybe even leading their own teams? Like, what are some of your kind of maybe bits of advice for folks who are in those positions about how to lower those barriers for developing these analytic skills?
Yeah. I was in a really interesting position when I came on as data director of Sunrise. So I managed 2 junior analysts and I quickly got a 3rd analyst onto my team. And none of them had ever really coded before joining my team. Didn't know any SQL, never really coded professionally. Like some of them had never written a line of code before in their life. And Sunrise has a culture of investing in people who are really committed to the movement and building them up sort of no matter what. And I took that to heart. And with my team, I sort of sat them down. I was like, y'all don't know how to do your jobs right now. And we're going to get there together and we're going to work on it together. And we're going to make time for it. And we're going to do this. And I did a couple of things kind of all at once, which is I made professional development a priority. And I talked to my team about how I didn't want them like coding all day at work and then ending their day at 6 and then like studying to learn how to code better at night. I told them that they needed to find time in their calendars during the work week to focus on becoming better technically. And I celebrated if they were able, if they had a week where they spent 3 hours studying or like training, I would really celebrate that. And as a manager, really push them to carve out time on their calendar. Sort of one of the biggest things I did was I found a tutor. His name is Jason Weiner. He is incredible. Perfect match of someone that has progressive political experience, has data experience, teaches at a college, so it was like professional teaching experience, and wanted to make a difference. And so I brought Jason onto my team as a consultant, and Jason meets with up to 3 of my staff people for up to 1 hour a week each individually. So they get one-on-one private tutoring in Python or SQL. And I worked with Jason to develop a curriculum for what each of my team members needed to work on. And then over the course of months, through partially my direction, but mainly through a lot of self-direction and exploration, Jason tutored my entire team in SQL and Python. And then later, as my team gained access, we have a professional development fund. I sent my deputy director to a really intensive analytics engineer training, and I've just been constantly looking for trainings and resources to send to my team. And then like that also required a shift in my role. So I had to say goodbye to writing a lot of code directly and lean into becoming a full-time manager. And I made space on my calendar for more code reviews, more pair programming, and made more space for my team to get their hands dirty with code and learn by doing. And the same way that I was able to learn SQL by getting into it, making mistakes, failing fast to succeed sooner.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Awesome. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more. You want to get the next one, Claire?
Sure. Okay. Can you talk about the balance between supporting the needs coming from the hubs versus the overall mission and direction for the larger Sunrise movement? What % of your time do you think you spend on each?
Yeah. I have an answer, and then I maybe don't have an answer, which is to say that Jasmine's role on my team is 100% focused on hub data and tech. And so she monitors our Slack channel where hubs ask for tech support. She onboards hubs to every auction. She develops trainings for hubs. And she's like, I hired her because I couldn't do both. And we needed someone full-time to really be focused on just our hubs. And so I would say that I work with Jasmine to make sure that I'm aware of what our hubs need technically and to make sure I'm advocating and fighting for that at the leadership level. But as data director, most of my attention is spent doing analytics for the organization itself. And then I support another full-time person on my team to do the like hub data support role.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, just to sort of like follow on to that, because we also have a question from the chat about like the local hubs. And so can you talk a little bit about like how their data, like maybe give an example or two of like how those hubs have used data in their local organizing? I assume there's some things that they all use, but then maybe there's the occasional kind of like that's different or like a new way we hadn't thought of before.
So we give all of our hubs access to Mobilize, which is a really powerful events tool. And then like Mobilize lets hubs put events, like make an event, put it out there in the public, make it easier for people to RSVP. Mobilize is also really powerful because it does automatic text reminders, and then it does like automatic attendance. So it's a really powerful tool for our hubs to know who's coming to their meetings or programs and keep track of attendance. And then like if someone missed a meeting, do that follow up. And we help hubs sort of like export that data, analyze that data. understand like a lot of what we have determined what hubs need is often just like a clean deduped member list. Hubs don't often have the luxury of having all the data systems that the national organization has, and that's just a compliance legal thing. And the thing they need the most is just knowing who's in their hub, and are they active, and what's their email, and what's their phone number. And believe it or not, that's kind of a challenging data engineering problem when you're using Airtable, Google Forms, Facebook events. And so one of my old teammates, Cormac Martinez, he built a super powered Google spreadsheet that could take data from Facebook, Mobilize, EveryAction, Airtable, et cetera, synthesize it into one deduped Google spreadsheet so that hub people could phone bank off of it, text bank off of it, know who's in their hub. Derek, I'm sure y'all don't have this problem here because y'all are very technical savvy people, but having basic CRM functionalities and just knowing basic data about your members has been really critical for our hubs.
Yeah, you'd be surprised that Chai Hack Night runs on a lot of Google Sheets and a lot of Google Forms. So yeah, it's great, right? And that it's so easy, but then you end up with just more data than you can manage without some tools like the ones you mentioned. Great. Well, it's 8 on the dot again. So I think we are out of time, but Brittany, thanks again so much for your time and sharing a little window into what you do every day. And the amazing work that your organization does. So we'll switch for everybody else. The live stream is going to wrap up, and we will drop a link in the chat. It's about to be shown here as well on the screen for the follow-up Zoom call. So folks are welcome to join that, and then we'll do some introductions and breakout groups and all that kind of stuff. Will be there. So we'll drop that in the chat as well. But thanks again for joining Hack Night, and we'll see everybody in the follow-up Zoom, and otherwise we'll see y'all next week.
Yeah, go forth and hack.
Go forth and hack.